Nils Wimby, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
I think there's something around perspective and sort of macro versus micro. 10 years ago, I think I was still quite sort of into digital marketing. That was my sort of line of profession in that time, and having that sort of isolated, siloed micro view on digital marketing being the next big thing, the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it was going to take over the world. I now realize that sort of being a bit humble to the fact that great things are happening in digital, but they are one piece of a bigger puzzle. I think that would have been a good insight to have brought to a 10-year younger myself.
The question I have then is, do you think it's possible to know that without going through that? So I've been through a similar journey. I worked in a social agency, an SEO
Mm,
agency, a search and social
mm.
agency, and then kind of slowly realized, yeah, there's more to this than just the digital tools that we have. Do you have to earn those stripes, or is it just that I wasn't bright enough?
I think it depends on where you're sitting. I think that's also like when I'm now agency side again after having been sort of client side for a while, to try to foster that within agencies and consultancies and all types of organizations. I know within like the agile school, they call it T-shaping. So you know a lot about your vertical, but you know a little about other things. So there can be ways to, I think, get that fostered into an organization, but generally, I think you do need to earn your stripes. I started off in sort of performance digital marketing. I've run creative agencies, digital agencies. I've been the CX guy, the SEO guy, but I've also been the brand guy, and I've been the client, and I've been the budget guy, and all of that. And it helps so much to have seen different perspectives and different viewpoints on the same problem.
I do love to whinge about performance marketing and complain about how they claim to have all the answers to all the problems. But I do think, if I roll back 20 years,
Mm,
when performance marketing kind of crashed into the marketing industry, it was
yeah.
so different because they were promising measurement at every level. Now we know now, looking
Mm,
back, that actually what they're measuring and what they're claiming maybe not quite the same thing. But at the time, it was so revolutionary, wasn't it, that you can understand why everybody, clients, agencies, everyone just fell headfirst into this. They're like, this is amazing. We can now measure our spend immediately.
absolutely. I mean, and I think both you and I were probably part of that bonanza when it happened. You know, you had all of these intricate consumer journeys where people would go from one touch point to the next one, and you would slowly nudge them down the funnel, and everything was viewed in isolation. So people looked like they were doing nothing else in their lives than having a digital relationship with your brand. Um, but I usually use, there's an analogy called the drunkard light post syndrome, where you have a policeman comes up to a drunk guy standing under a light post and asks, "What are you doing?" "Well, I lost my keys." The policeman starts helping look for the keys. They stand there for half an hour. They've looked all around the light post, and the policeman ends up asking, "Are you sure you lost your keys here?" And the drunk man answers, "No, I lost them over there in the park, but it's so dark there." So, I mean, where we have things to look at that are easy to look at, we tend to
Mhm.
focus. And I think there's
Yeah.
such a big thing there in the enormous amount of granular, real time updated, cost free data that appeared in the digital
Mhm.
sphere. And at the contrast towards brand tracking, which is, you know, three data points
Mhm.
updated once a quarter at a huge cost, and they barely even move.
Mhm.
But they might then, if we, you know, use the Binet field way of looking things, you should spend 60% of your time looking at that data point and 40% looking at the 12 different real-time updated dashboards you have for digital. But that's a tricky equation. So I think it's sort of human error in that. In the way that we just focus on what looks most urgent, and what looks most urgent is what we have most data on.
You can see why people make that. I wouldn't call it a mistake, but you can see why it's very alluring, can't you, to be drawn to that light side. Yeah,
and I think it's the whole perception is reality concept. So when you look at something and there's a big dial and that dial is flashing red, you think that that's the most important thing. And I think it applies to a lot of things. I did some very manual research some time ago with a ruler, looking at some of the standardized models we have for funnels. And if you look at a funnel, it's fairly sort of vertical. It doesn't lean in a lot. But if you look at all the research, around 95% of people in the market are not actively in the market at any given time, how we need to weigh the broad reach towards the targeted, that funnel should have looked very differently. But in all of the textbooks, it looks like lower funnel consideration amounts to 70% of what broad reach brand awareness should be, which is wrong. But when we look at that, we make assumptions. I think the human brain isn't more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. What a start. But if we've kind of blown straight through from what you knew 10 years ago right into the thick of it. So thank you very much for that. Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of the show, and I would like to thank you for choosing to listen today. Today's guest is Nils Wimby. Nils is the Group Client Service Director at Mindshare. He is based in Stockholm, which is in Sweden. I'm sure you knew that anyway. And he's one of the smartest people in the marketing industry. He would never say that. I'm telling you that about him. He is. And it's just been great to get him on the show. Who is he? Well, he's worked previously for Volvo when they were on their premiumization journey. So we talk a little bit about that, especially given that when we did the interview, the Jaguar rebrand was live and everybody had an opinion on that. So listening to a guy who's worked for a company that was in the process from going from kind of an everyday car to a premium car, really interesting take on that. We look at Mindshare and what they do. We talk about an analogy he's used before about architect, plumber, and pipe wrench, which if you've not read, there's a link in the show notes. Read it. It's about the difference between strategy and tactics and architecture and planning and all this sort of stuff. And it's a brilliant, simple way of looking at the problem, which I absolutely love. This is just a great 45 minutes, 50 minutes for people who love marketing strategy, because you've got one of the smartest people in the industry talking about it and explaining all the things he thinks of. I love this. Thank you for tuning in. It'll start in about 60 seconds. But before that, I just have to give you a word about something that I'm doing. I am also, as well as the host of this podcast, I'm the strategy director at Eximo Marketing. I've been involved with Seth Godin a couple of times. He's done a podcast with me before. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And I've interviewed him at a couple of events in Belfast. We are now going to do a strategy masterclass 3 times in Ireland. Once in Belfast, once in Derry, once in Dublin. Now, if you want to come along, Seth is going to join us from where he lives in America on the big screen. He's going to guide you through a process to help you develop a strategy. I'm going to be there, kind of the link between you in the room and him on the screen. I'm also going to give you a presentation about lessons I've learned about marketing strategy from this very podcast. We're also going to be joined by Chris and Aidan from Horrible Brands, who are going to talk about brand strategy and how that all works and how it all fits together. It's going to be an action-packed afternoon, 1 till 5, because Seth's joining us from the States. And it's Belfast, Monday, the 3rd of February at the Mac. Derry, Friday, the 7th of March at the Walled City Brewery. Friday in a brewery, what could possibly go wrong? And Thursday, the 3rd of April in Dublin at the Guinness Enterprise Centre. That's not the Guinness Storehouse, it's the Guinness Enterprise Centre. Stick it in Google Maps, you'll find out. As a Strategy Sessions listener, you have a discount code. Tickets are usually $265 per person, but if you use the discount code EXIMO, EXIMO, you will get that ticket for $225 per person. Strictly limited to 50 people per session, no more. That's it. So if you want a ticket, there's a link in the show notes. The code is in the show notes as well. Capital E for Eximo. All the details you need are there. It'll take you to a page on the website. Go and buy a ticket. I look forward to seeing you there. If you've got any questions, if you would like to know more about the show, about this with Seth, about the Nils interview, whatever it is, let me know. There's a link to contact me, again, in the show notes. Wherever you are, please, if you're on YouTube watching this, hello, I'll give you a wave. Sorry about the beard. Like the video, please, and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Spotify, you can leave questions there, and you can also rate the show 5 stars, and you can do that, I think, on Apple as well. Enough of me waffling and trying to sell you things. Let's get back to Nils and have a listen to him because, as I said, one of the smartest guys on the planet. Really, really enjoyed this. See you soon. Nils Wimby, welcome to the strategy sessions. For those people who don't know you, let's just have a little bit of background. Where are you at the minute, and what's your job at the moment? And then we'll kind of unpick your career and the things you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as mentioned, digital guy from start. I've been at Carrot and Dentsu and Isobar, which was the creative offering within Dentsu Group. I've been at If, which is the largest insurance company in the Nordics, as head of marketing. Recently did a stint at Volvo Cars, global marketing analytics, and currently I'm at Mindshare in Sweden in a sort of client service strategy, vague type of role. So yeah, part of the WPP group currently.
Excellent. So what I'm going to start with is almost the past part of your career, because I want to start with a piece you wrote for JP Castling's newsletter, a friend of this podcast, about the architect, the plumber, and the pipe wrench, which I think, going back to your first answer about knowing that maybe digital and performance wasn't the be-all and end-all, can you just sort of take us through the architect, plumber, and pipe wrench and tell us about that and what inspired you to write it?
Absolutely. So having been part of sort of most of the seats around the marketing table, being client side, media agency, creative agency, all of that, you realize that there's so many discussions that turn into dualities and conflicts almost. And some of them, sure, you're arguing if A is better than B, you're comparing apples to apples. But what I realized over time is a lot of time the conflict or debate is actually because you're comparing apples to pears. So what is happening a lot of times is that you're taking something which is a tactical tool and can be a very good tactical tool, but you're trying to drive a discussion as if that tool is a strategy. And that's where you end up in sort of people saying, should we do performance marketing or should we look at growing our brand internationally over X years, and I realized from that dichotomy that, performance marketing is one practice that can play into a bigger puzzle, but it's not one or the other. And that's what led to the pipe wrench, plumber, and architect analogy, which is pipe wrenches are tools. They are tools that can be very well suited for doing a job. They might, in some instances, be suitable for doing another job. They can develop over time and find new use cases, but they are tools. And how and when they are used should be determined by a subject matter expert. So that's where the plumber comes in. So you want the plumber to be able to say, what pipe wrench do I use and at what time, et cetera, et cetera. That's a skill set. But then if you ask a plumber to build a house, you're going to have a house full of only bathrooms, which is not going to be ideal. And that's where the architect comes in. So the architect is the long-term strategist, the person who knows a little about a lot of crafts, but isn't the subject matter experts on any one of them, and helps sort of prioritize, optimize, and weigh them against each other. And that has helped me, that analogy, because what you can say in a lot of the discussions going on today, social media, it's a pipe wrench. AI is a pipe wrench. A lot of people are saying, all right, our strategy is to be first in AI. No, AI is a tool. AI is a tool that can be used within different crafts. It could be creative production, it could be optimizing pricing strategies, what have you. But it is a tool. It can be used in different fields, but it needs to be subject to, does this fit into our long-term vision on how we're building the house? And it's helped me in a lot of discussions. I actually had a discussion with with TikTok on a Nordic level, where I told the leadership for TikTok that they were a pipe wrench, but that they should be happy to be a pipe wrench, and they actually bought into it. Because if you are on that level, you can find a better rhetoric and explain how you, if you can say, how does this pipe wrench fit into a global brand's overall long-term architecture, that's actually a better story than saying pipe wrenches will take over the world. So I think it helps find the nuance and the level on what is strategy and what is specialty competence, and what is a tool.
It doesn't surprise me that people at TikTok understood they are the pipe wrench,
Yeah.
because when you look at the marketers at social media tools, whether it's TikTok, Twitter, back in the day, probably not now. I don't know that they even have marketing anymore. But back in the day with Twitter, LinkedIn marketers, Facebook, when they first started growing, you look at some of the things that they did. They invested
Mm.
heavily in TV. TikTok sponsored the Euros last year. They were on
Yeah.
Wrexham's football shirts. They knew that if they wanted to build their brand, they couldn't just use the pipe wrench. That, they had good marketers who understood the role of the
Yeah.
architect, the plumber, and the pipe wrench. I feel like what I've just done is said that you're a bad marketer if you don't understand that difference. Well, I think what I'm saying is they've got very good marketers who do understand that. So it doesn't surprise me that
Absolutely.
they understood that metaphor.
Yeah, but I think it's very helpful, because as marketers, marketing, I think um, I think Rory Sutherland once said something to the effect of marketing is a very special practice. It's not like physics or chemistry. The opposite of one very good decision could be another very good decision. So I would argue that marketing is a science, but it is not an exact science. And in that, there are endless opportunities. There's so much going on, and a lot of these things and opportunities. Um, Part of it is some sort of a FOMO within this industry. We as marketers want to stay up with the trendiest and latest things happening out there. But also, some of these pipe wrenches have huge marketing budgets, and some of them using them sort of perhaps in the wrong way. Try to argue the story that as long as you buy the right pipe wrench, you're going to have a house in the end. So that flips the perspective a lot. And I think just talking about things like AI or segmentation or personalization, or a lot of these things, the buzzwords that are flying around constantly in our industry, and you can say that's fine, that's a good thing, it has good potential, but it is still a tool. It is not a strategy. So jumping on the bandwagon of every new marketing buzzword trend, you can sort of find a bit of perspective in it in that sense.
So I'm interested in the marketing is a science but not an exact science comment. Years
Mm,
ago, 15ish years ago, when I did a postgrad in marketing to kind of top up my undergrad, but there was a whole section in my thesis I had to write about, is marketing an art or a science? I
mm,
can't even remember why that was in there, but I had to write it, and I came down broadly in the same place, more of a science,
mm,
but not fully kind of physics science. One
yeah.
thing that strikes me when I read How Brands Grow, Ehrenberg Bass's work, if I had one criticism of it, it feels very much like what they're saying is you just have to follow this and it'll work.
Mm,
I might be being oversimplifying their work a little bit there, but it's like, just these are the rules. If you follow these rules, it'll work. Which feels like it's very much 100% science. Is that,
mm.
do you, have I misrepresented that? Do you think? Would you agree with my take? Is that right or wrong? How would you see that?
So I think, I mean, there's such an interesting debate ongoing around the bigger minds within marketing today. So I mean, I think my sort of first awakening, getting out of the performance marketing silo, was probably Binet and Field's work. So, which I think was tremendously useful at that point, for saying, hey, all of this social media and digital attribution has made us very focused on short-term tactical things rather than building brands. And therefore, that was useful at the time. Now, at least in my experience, over time, you realize, all right, some of the methodology, the sample sizes, et cetera, in that work, also the clear division between what is a long-term and a short-term media and campaign. There's some things there that are perhaps, as I would say it, Byron Sharp has more of a good dial on in, but at the time it was useful, you know. So I think there's always force majeure in marketing. You have macro trends, you have political unrest, you have a gazillion things going on, cultural trends, etc., etc. You will never be able to do an that is exact, because there's always something coming in from the side. So I don't think there will ever be exact science. I do think that if you take out the force majeure, the uncertain effects, Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass have a very well dialed in view on, bar extraordinary events, what does it take to achieve growth within your market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would actually argue that the recipe that they put forward, you say, well, it's so easy to follow it. It's pretty tough medicine, you know. You have to, go to your board and say, I want a marketing budget that is sizable enough to give me a share of voice that is bigger than current market share. You need to argue for longevity and consistency and keep investing, even though we're not seeing sales figures, because we know that's a long-term effect to building brand. You need to invest in physical availability, being in the right place, working in the right way with distribution and sort of range of products, etc., etc. I think it's one of the toughest jobs there is to achieve that. And I think that is also why there's always that appeal in the new things, in the new shiny things, in performance marketing, in new attribution, in AI. Everyone wants to say, I outsmarted the system. I found a clever way around climbing that mountain. But I think generally, unless you have something really extraordinary out there, or some macro effects that are really big, or I think there's also some criticism of Ehrenberg Bass because they say it's fairly defensive. You look at your market, your category, you try to grow 2 percentage points, and I'm perfectly happy with accepting, hey, there will be Teslas in this world, there will be Metas, there will be 10x companies, but you cannot build your strategy on that, because 99% of us who work in marketing every day, every week, every year, the job is those 2 extra percentage point market share within the already defined market. So I think for doing that day-to-day hugely important job, I think Ehrenberg Bass has a pretty good dial on what the science is.
And for a lot of companies as well, 2% market share is actually a huge, the number with a euro or a dollar or a pound at the beginning is huge, isn't it? For 2% on some of the big markets, it's enormous. So
yeah, absolutely. And of course also, price premium and price elasticity. Can we? I think that's so interesting. So we've just recording this on the week after Black Friday. And everyone is looking at that on how do we maximize Black Friday. No one is really asking the question, how can we build a brand that is so strong that we don't have to even get involved in Black Friday? And that I think is a really interesting sort of other perspective on Black Friday.
I still can't fully understand how European retailers have sold themselves out. When I grew up, the story always was who went into sale before Christmas. So you could always tell which high street retailer was struggling because they went to sale on the 20th or 21st of December because they were desperate to get some pounds in before Christmas and they had to shut for a few days. But by and large, all retailers just held their noses, held their nerve, and went into sale on Boxing Day. on the 26th. And now retailers are out falling over themselves to offer discounts from the beginning of November in what used to be the period they made all their money at full rate, at full margin. We just burn margin now. And you think, what collective madness have we gone through where retailers have just cut their own throats in their best time of year? But that the genie is out of the bottle now. There is no going back, is there? It's madness.
Well, I mean, I think there is some promise in a sort of backwards way. There is some promise in the current economic downturn globally, that macro trend, because one of the things that has fueled short-termism, growth at the expense of margin, has been that capital has been free, and everyone has been looking at growth, and that's where you also, if you combine that with all of the short-termism of digital media, it's just throwing a match on a gas, because I think that has been so. If we look at the idea of building long-term, slowly building a long-term brand thinking, that creates a price premium, and that allows you to just bring back, a sizable bag of cash to your shareholders every quarter for a 10-year period. That perspective has been out of the window these past 10 years or so. It's like it's growth. It's 100% growth. And I think that's been a very dangerous combination, where venture capital and getting enough growth to make a quick exit out of a company, that type of philosophy has influenced marketing at large.
That gives us a perfect segue to move into your work at Volvo. Volvo, jump in and correct me if I get this wrong, but Volvo a decade, 15 years ago, was a very good family car known for being reliable, safe, reasonably priced. They then went on a premiumization period over at least 10 years of building more premium cars, charging higher prices. But that, everyone thinks, oh, we should just go premium, we'll put our prices up. There's more to going premium than just charging premium prices. And you often lose sales and possibly lose money in the early days as you wait to hit that growth span and wait for the long-term strategy to pay off. So just as you were talking about, we were talking about Black Fridays and retailers, but that bit about no one has that long-term thinking, it feels from the outside like they did at Volvo. They took the decision to move up market, to make more revenue per model or whatever the main metrics were. And you've been part of that story for a while recently. So firstly, have I kind of explained it correctly, or did I get it wrong? And secondly, what's that look like from the inside?
Absolutely, Volvo Cars has been on a very conscious strategy of premiumization, and I think Volvo's gone through a few different sets of ownership. There's been macro market developments that have informed that. But that decision, probably, as you say, 15 years ago or so, but has also linkages to the fact that the economies of scale within automotive means that if you don't go premium, the sheer size and volume of cars that you need to sell every year, that's just constantly going up and going up. And I believe I was never near those decisions, and I wasn't even at Volvo at that time, but I think there was an understanding at some point that Volvo is never going to be Volkswagen, or Ford, or like one of those huge volume brands. So what's the other avenue to go down? Well, premiumization was probably a very conscious decision in that. And over time, I think in close collaboration between, product, the engineers delivering the product, pricing and marketing, that has been a successful journey for Volvo.
And I think Volvo's journey has influenced a lot in the automotive sector over the last decade. I've done a few projects in automotive over the last 5 years, since COVID, 4 or 5 years. And what's noticeable is that certainly as EVs are launched, the brands are putting their prices up. Now, they cost a little bit more to make, but Ford, for example, is struggling in the UK at least, and maybe across Europe, from slightly falling sales. But the average cost of a Ford, an electric Ford, is, I think, about £20,000 in the UK more than a petrol or a diesel Ford,
Yeah.
as they're moving slightly up market. And I think when you zoom back a step, I wonder if what Volvo has done pretty successfully has actually inspired some of the thinking at Jaguar Land Rover behind what do we do with Jaguar. Sales have been falling. Sales have kind of gone off a cliff over the last decade for them. But all the cars are now, Volvo, have kind of overtaken them. Ford's prices are going up. Everyone's prices are going up. They're just now in a mass. So they've decided to go super premium. It's a high risk strategy, but I
It
think
is.
you can almost see the PowerPoint to say this is where we are now, this is where we need to be, and we've got to go down that way. So I
Yeah.
think that's, again, completely externally. I have no inside knowledge of it. When I saw the rebrand, I was like, let's just see where this goes. And when you see the concepts come out, you're like, I mean, it's a high risk strategy, but I think I understand it at least.
Yeah, I mean, my God, there's been enough said around the Jaguar rebrand, but I think, I mean, if you just look at the sales figures, I think you can debate, you know, the creative direction of that relaunch video. You can debate the design of the cars, but what I think they are correct in is the assessment that they need to do something drastic. You know, they are too small a volume brand to survive unless they make a drastic change. So I think the idea of creating something drastic, I think is spot on. Is this the right direction? I couldn't say. It's going to be an
Time will
interesting
tell.
journey.
Yeah, time
Yeah,
will.
absolutely.
And I think, again, it feels like we're having a JP Castlin loving. We're not, but JP pointed out. He said, everyone who's a brand strategist looks at the brand. Everyone who's a marketing strategist looks at this, and everyone has their own opinion based on where they're looking from. I think
Yeah.
when I started reading some of the information behind it and their sales figures particularly, and you start looking at it and go, you can't survive selling that many cars,
No.
and it feels like a business strategy decision. This isn't
Yeah.
marketing needs to know its place in this, and it's beneath the business strategy. That's where
Yeah.
that's where we come in, and then the brand strategy probably a step below that. So you've got to wait and see how this all plays out. But and set look, but it's not easy, as Volvo would probably have a case study somewhere to say that it takes years to premiumize. It's not just a one car, one price point thing.
No, no,
Everything
no.
has to fall in line behind that.
Yeah. No, it's going to be very interesting to follow Jaguar on this one. But it's like, I know also, like, the one of the core, as you say, you need to look at the whole puzzle, like the piece that got so much attention and criticism was actually, in hindsight, a launch teaser kind of video thingy for a new, brand architecture. So and everyone's like, all right, this people with wigs, is that Jaguar now? Well, no, it was one tiny, but that got all of the attention. So
Yeah.
now it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think it's super risky, but I think also they are in a position where they need to make risky moves in order to have any chance.
The one thing that I did read somewhere, which doesn't seem to have got much chat in the debate about the logo and the font and all that sort of stuff, but they've shut down, I think in the UK, they're going to open 10 or 12 showrooms across the whole country instead of having a Jaguar showroom everywhere. And they're almost going to be like art installations, I think. It was kind of a
Mm.
real different perspective on what a car garage would be.
Mm.
And it's kind of been glossed over because I don't think anybody's seen them. But given what we've now seen of what the cars look like, they've
Mm.
gone for this whole 360 experience for the customer, if it's in the way they've described it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves over the next. Well, I don't think there's a new car coming out until 2026, is there? So
No.
the next 12 to 18 months are going to be fascinating in the Jaguar discussion.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I think it's my sort of Ehrenberg Bass fanboyism shining through here. But I mean, what I do think is important. People don't change the way they buy cars because of Jaguar. They want to browse, they want to easily access, they want to be able to work omni-channel, and I think that's where we've seen, like, for instance, in Sweden, we recently heard that Polestar, Volvo's fully electric sub brand, which has been fully online, as a Tesla kind of thingy, they're now starting to sell through physical outlets as well, retailers. And that comes down to Ehrenberg Bass and physical availability. Best practice is to have your car as buyable in as many outlets as possible. And then the other piece of learning, and once again, I'm not judging on the rebrand, but I mean, I think Jenny Romanuk and her thinking on distinctive brand assets, I think they might have missed the point on a few items there. Absolutely be playful with colors, and you can be playful with some brand codes as long as you have some brand codes that are consistent, so that people actually remember, and in a very pragmatic level, that we get some sender ID on our ad materials, and changing the color scheme and the logo and the car designs at the same point in time. If that is what they're aiming to do, it seems a bit drastic, but yeah, jury's still out on that one, I guess.
Definitely about I did some work with I'll just call them a Chinese automotive manufacturer launching in Europe. I'll not say which one. And they had at the time a handful of locations across the UK, and sort of trying on a call to explain that people in the UK are not going to drive from York in the north of the country to Edinburgh for their nearest showroom, which is kind of a 3-hour drive to go and have a look at the car. And they're like, well, why not? And they're like, I mean, British people won't go half an hour to look at the new car. It has to be there, right on their doorstep. So it's slightly different mentality, but yeah, physical availability is a huge issue.
Yeah, and I think and that's where you also, if you come back to the architect thinking, we've seen huge advances in, not least, I mean, all consumer journeys where digital is taking a bigger part. I worked with a Korean car brand 12 years ago, and they were actually having reports from the dealerships that people, 40% walking in through the door, said, I don't need a test drive. I've seen enough stuff online and reviews and videos, so I know it's a decent car. Where do I sign? And that's a really good insight, and that really informs, all right, we need to look at our digital consumer journey. We need to make sure that we have good content online, that people see if they can fit this or that tram in the back of the car if they have kids and stuff like that. But we still need to think about the 60% who want to make a test drive. So I think, and that's where I think, like, one of the buzzwords at the time on omnichannel was at that time a buzzword to focus on digital. But omnichannel is omni. So, how do we find that best customer experience cross physical and digital? And I think that's interesting, where you see sort of the pendulum swinging back sometimes on digital now, where, for instance, Polestar is starting to sell through physical Volvo outlets as well. Yeah. Be buyable across as many touch points as possible to maximize physical availability.
So I'm going to keep my car references going strong here for the next 30 seconds, but I would just want to reverse us back into talking about Jaguar for a moment. Not to unpick the brand or anything, but because I think it links in to the next concept I want to talk about. And with a full apology to any Swedish speakers listening, what I want to talk about is Problemformuleringsprivilegiet. Can you just save me and just and say that word for me, please? And apologies to anyone who's listening about that.
So the Swedish word is Problemformuleringsprivilegiet.
Which sounds much better when you say it. So thank you very much. So this interview came around because of this word, which I actually sent Nils a LinkedIn direct message, said, would you just send me a voice note and tell me how you say this? So occasionally, if I'm having a bad day, I just go to that direct message and play it every now and again and just listen to Nils. And go, it's wonderful. So relaxing. But I think it's relevant. The reason I wanted to reverse into Jaguar, I think it's quite relevant to the decisions that they've made in terms of you've got to decide. I think to anglicize it a little, the way I kind of took it and interpreted it was, you've got to decide what problem you're solving. And if you have the privilege of shaping that problem, you have the privilege of creating the answer.
Yeah.
That's broadly well. In fact, you explain what the concept is, because I think that's maybe what relevant with Jaguar. They've decided this is the problem, and that's helped them decide how they're going to solve it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, it loosely translates to the privilege of deciding what the problem is. What are we actually talking about here? And I
And it
think,
came from a school teacher of yours. You picked this
yeah,
concept up at school.
yeah, social sciences in high school. My teacher said that, I'm going to try to educate you in social sciences the coming 3 years. You're gonna forget at least 90% of everything I try to teach you. But if you're going to remember one thing, remember Problemformuleringsprivilegiet. So I think, it's not, it's a fairly sort of common, perhaps not word as such, but a common theme when you look at social issues, science, society, social science, society, politics, history. I mean, we've seen a lot of, needs to think differently on historical events, given other insights we have now, and someone in Imperial England back in the day would have looked at international affairs as a very different problem to solve compared to what the United Nations would say today. So it is that thing on what is it we are trying to solve, and sometimes you get people have very different perspectives of that. So if we come back to omni-channel once again, back 10 years ago or 12 years ago, omni-channel was defined as a problem of how do we add more digital touch points to our existing consumer journey. But that's not actually the whole story, and I think that's it plays into a lot of the discussions today. When you're like, I'm currently at a media agency, so I have a lot of discussions on media channels, and in that you have a lot of meetings you walk into where people describe the what to address around a media channel is how do you adapt the brand well enough so that it fits in the prerequisites of doing something good in that channel. So the problem is defined as how do we adapt our brand enough to make something impactful and good in this channel. I would argue that the question is, can we express our brand in a good way in this channel? If not so, let's stay away from that channel. Mm-hmm. So that's one very sort of clear example on how to use that term in marketing, I think, or how do we maximize the value of AI rather than is AI our best bet for growth in the coming 3 years? So I think that's some of the ways that I tend to use the concept. And I think it also, I think, plays into, as you say, what's been the bullet point on the agenda in the boardroom at Jaguar.
Yeah,
we don't really know, and that makes it very tricky to say, all right, I don't like that pink, it's gonna fail. It can be very much, we've explored all of the other avenues. We've looked at traditional Britishness and British racing green and how big the market size is within affluent 50 plus UK community and what the competitors are there. And there's nothing good there. So either we just close down shop entirely, or we give it one last shot at something out there, and then the result is pink and a rebrand. Who knows?
I don't just want to make this a Jaguar podcast, but when you look at their sales numbers,
yeah,
you do tend to think the bullet point on the agenda wasn't should we rebrand. The bullet point was, are we closing this brand down? But you look at what their sales figures are and the price they sell cars for. This is, it's a terminal. Is it going to die? And that takes you to a very different. The privilege of the problem you are solving then is very different to
Yeah.
do we like the Jaguar on the badge or not. So it's a concept I love, because when I've talked about it in presentations and with clients, what I've noticed is just by discussing the concept
Mm.
and getting people to deliberately think, oh, hold on, what problem are we solving? And
Mm.
I've always done this in strategy when working with clients, mainly trying to explain what I believe marketing strategy is, and therefore how we're going to tackle this leads you to do this. But saying to them, look, I heard this word from this Swedish guy, don't ask me to pronounce it, but what it means is we need to decide, let's decide exactly what problem we're solving and how we shape that,
Yeah.
because that could take us in different directions. And just asking
Yeah.
people to be deliberate in that decision actually changes how they approach it, which I've really enjoyed and noticed in the last couple of months.
I think it's a good one. I mean, and who knows, how, I mean, if you look at the potential, this is going to sound sort of cheap, but if you look at the potential within the enormous Asian market to work with rebranding, premiumization, and a bit of badge engineering and going into electrical cars, that potential might be triple the size of the entire European market for Jaguar. I don't know. I wasn't part of that boardroom, so once again, it's difficult to know all of the background to it, and therefore difficult to say what problem they are trying to solve.
Yeah. But no, I love the fact that it's out there, and hopefully your social science teacher doesn't want commission for every time I butcher this word. I should probably donate to a Swedish charity every time I try and say it, because there'll be Swedes everywhere going, just stop, please don't try and say it again. So,
But I think, addressing what the problem is one very important practice. But the other one, which I think tends to be forgotten within marketing, and once again, with our innumerable opportunities within modern marketing, is the concept of prioritization and taking things out and what not to do. Opportunity cost. I used to work with the guy who's now the CMO of Klarna, David Sandstrom, and he said, the one of the super interesting things about marketing is that it's a combination of two very different fields, which is economics and psychology. And to my mind, the most important concept we take away from economics is opportunity cost. How do we prioritize? What do we take away? What could we have done instead with this budget that we are allocating to social media channel X? And the psychology bit is, I would say that my favorite piece of thinking there is Daniel Kahneman and nudging and thinking fast and slow, and just the concept of we don't care about brands. Nobody has a love affair with a car brand. Nobody is a brand ambassador for a retailer of any sorts. There are a few, but they are exceptions to the rule.
yeah.
Real life humans have real lives. They have families and careers and real life problems, and their ability and the effort they have left for thinking about different car brands is so very, very minimal. So I think that's really sort of a few pieces of thinking that informs. And when you look at opportunity cost, and that was actually one of the guys at Volvo Cars, a guy called Morten Levenstam, who I had some interactions with, one of those guys who expresses themselves not in PowerPoints or emails, but in white papers, with abstracts and everything like that. Very, very clever guy. But he said, and I think this is true for a lot of organizations, so it's not Volvo specific, but he said, we have far too many potentially profitable initiatives in relation to our resources. Therefore, the main objective of a strategy is to inform what not to do. And I think that when you look at, and coming back to Problemformuleringsprivilegiet, when I've sat in leadership roles in marketing organizations, and everyone is adding things on constantly. We need to do something with organic social, and we need to add something now around Black Week, and we need to add. And when you flip that question to say, I think we don't have enough resources to make a huge impact, and if we even want to move the needle, we need to think fewer, bigger, better. So what are our few big bets, but more importantly, what things are we taking out of the mix? And that really can jug some people's, rock their world, because you're sitting there with a marketing plan with 800 different dots for different activations of different things, and everyone thinks each and every one of them is super important and crucial, but just thinking, what do we take out?
Yeah.
How do we prioritize and deprioritize is a good mental model, I think.
Yeah, and very tough to do. Very tough to,
Yeah.
because you think you often feel you're going to get lauded for adding things on, and here's a new initiative, and here's the new thing and the new thing, and it's hard to say. Well, I've gone in and I've taken out 80% of the plan. It's hard
Yeah.
to do. So brilliant,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, look, I'm aware of the time, so I just want to ask you one more question before we get to the very last question. Anyway, which is just about your current employer. You're at Mindshare, as you said. It's a WPP
Yep.
owned agency. And it's a purpose-driven agency as well. So how does that work? So there are other, as you said, some great marketing minds. Mark Ritson, previously on this podcast
Yep.
as well, who has an interesting view on purpose in marketing. So how does that fit, and how do you fit into that sort of great WPP machine as well, which is huge and multi-headed?
So I'm not sure how well sort of established this is within rest of Mindshare, but I definitely have my take on it. So the Mindshare promise is what we call good growth. Now, some people would interpret that as very much, purpose driven and being friendly to nature and society, etc., etc. But to me, good growth is sustainable growth, and sustainable to me means adding long-term value. So I'm 100% in agreement with Ritson. Brands should maximize profit, follow laws and rules and regulations, and pay their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And then governments take care of the important things like, the ecosystem and gender equality. That shouldn't be, driven by an ice cream brand. It's too big of an issue. But I think that there still is something to be said for sustainable and good, in the fact that making sure we adhere to the rules. There's new EU laws coming along on reporting transparency on carbon footprint on media investments, etc., etc. Let's make sure that the brands that we work with know the regulations, follow the regulations, but they also work in a sustainable way. And it's coming back to that short-termism in economy. Let's work to build brands and companies that can be long-term sustainable, that can pay taxes, that can employ people in a long-term sustainable and add to society in that capacity. So that's my take on good growth and sustainability from my perspective.
Excellent. No, and it sounds like I see some of your LinkedIn posts, and it looks like you have a lot of fun while you do it as well, which is, I think, really important for work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's and I think there's, you were talking about, is it science or is it creativity? And I think it's the mix. I think you need to know the science, you need to know the strategy, and that part is writing the brief. And the brief should be fairly, clear, and it should set clear boundaries. And then within those boundaries, you find the role for creativity. So I think you can have fun and still sort of follow the Ehrenberg Bass playbook.
Fantastic. Well, look, before you go, I need to ask you one more question. I think I might even know the answer to this. I'm going to go back to mind reading, but I think I know what the answer is going to be. But if you could recommend a book or a resource, podcast, whatever, that you think people should read or listen to or subscribe to, what would that be?
I mean, it's. I think it's a bit of a giveaway, given what I've been saying. But I mean, how brands grow to me is.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, I think that should be, when you get a driver's license, and there's been discussion on like how marketers is one of the professions with the lowest percentage of people who are actually educated within marketing.
Yeah.
You should definitely follow Mark Ritson. You should follow Rory Sutherland, and you should read How Brands Grow. There are exceptions to the rules within How Brands Grow. You can argue that new digital channels are changing the landscape, new things are happening. Absolutely, there are objections, but you should take those special cases as deviations from the rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb is described within How Brands Grow. I think it was one of the Ehrenberg Bass professors, Magda Neitz-Thiel. I was on the same stage with her at one point, and she was talking about everyone now, especially in marketing, is test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. New, innovative, A/B testing. Let's try and find a way back to learn, test, and learn. And I think that was so brilliant. And her analogy was also like, if you have a dozen engineers coming together to build a bridge, absolutely, you think about new materials, new ways of constructing it. Should it be pillars or should it be a different type of construction? Should we work with plastics, 3D printing? What do I know? But what you don't do in that group of engineers is sit down and say, let's have a brainstorm. What do we think about this concept of gravity? Do we believe in that? So I think that, the basics and the fundamentals and the concept and how psychology works and Kahneman, we need to study up on that. Then we can do the iterations of test and learn. And I think a good starting point for that initial learning is How Brands Grow.
Brilliant. Well, look, Nils, thank you very much. This has been an amazing 52 minutes just picking your brains. I've loved every minute of it, and I hope everyone else has found it as useful as I have. So thank you very much for your time. How does anyone reach you or follow you if they want to sort of stay in touch?
So I publish most of my stuff on LinkedIn. It's Nils Wimby, Mindshare. I think you can find me there.
We'll have a link in the show notes as well to that and to all the other things we've talked about today. So Nils, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.